Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Fifth Child Podcast, the weekly podcast where I, your podcaster, Chris, give you two different recommendations, either for video games, anime, movies, television series, and the like. I want to thank you once again for coming back to this week's podcast. These weekly podcasts have been getting a little bit shorter recently, and that's mostly because of my own personal life, and also because I've been dedicating all of my time to one single video game, and of course my weekly anime that are currently on this season. So now that I finally finished Fire Emblem Three Houses, you can expect that episode to drop at any moment now while I'm busy recording and compile all the information I need to talk about that. Got a lot of thoughts, I'm trying to put it all together, and I just want to make sure that that entire episode is all one length of an entire one episode podcast just dedicated to that game. But at least for now, we can now kind of go back to our normal routine of having two topics per episode. And for this episode specifically, I do have one anime and one video game that I wanted to talk about. So I want to thank you again for coming to the podcast. Again, if you like what you see here and you always want to see more, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe. If you're using mobile, please hit that bell icon. That way you know whenever this next week's podcast always airs. Like I said, as you've noticed, every single podcast comes out at 12 o'clock in the afternoon every single Friday. So please stay tuned if you want to keep on listening in to the next week's podcast. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into the podcast topics for today. And before we jump into the animes, I did want to talk about something specifically. I'm going to date this episode ever so slightly just by saying this, but this morning a big trailer dropped. Not really a trailer, more like a sneak peek that I really wanted to talk about for just a little bit, and that was the fact that we got a brand new sneak peek at the next and final Star Wars episode in the Star Wars Skywalker saga, and that is Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. We've already seen one teaser trailer for it that came out in early March, I believe, and we've gotten a new sneak peek brought to us by the Disney D23 convention over in Florida, and we finally have gotten this small 2-minute sneak peek. It's not really a full trailer because the first half of it is more or less kind of the chronology of some of the major events in Star Wars leading up to where we're at right now, and the last minute of it or so was actually new content, new footage from the movie that we haven't seen yet. And I do kind of want to talk about that because I think there's some really awesome imagery that kind of lends us into where we're going to go with in this, the series. So we kind of already know exactly where the series. We already kind of know that the series is kind of in a weird place where we're not entirely certain where it's going to go. And after Star Wars: The Last Jedi, it's fair to say that the fan base is in a bit of a disarray right now. It's hard to have a concise and consensus of exactly what we want out of a Star Wars film. So there's a lot riding on this film to kind of win back the crowd of those who did not like The Last Jedi, and want to see more of a traditional Star Wars movie, and also those who love The Last Jedi, but are also hoping that this series doesn't double back and decide to go back to a heavy predictable material, like we're afraid of. But there's a lot of really cool imagery in this. We get to see the more adventures of the Resistance fighting against the First Order. We get to see more of Poe Dameron, Finn. We get to see little snippets of Princess Leia back in again. Again, if you know nothing about Star Wars, why are you listening to this podcast? You're listening to a nerdy podcast. You should be able. If you're connected to anything nerdy whatsoever, you know what Star Wars is. So I'm just gonna go at it as if you actually know about what Star Wars is. If you haven't, you can skip ahead a little bit into the video games. But I'm gonna talk some Star Wars for a little bit. There's a lot of great imagery. One of the coolest imageries I've seen is all of the Resistance ships flying out of hyperspace into, it looks like just a random atmosphere, a random planet that we don't know yet. And then almost to meet them, you see a whole fleet of Star Destroyers from the First Order. And it just looks absolutely frightening. The last time that I've seen imagery like this was all the way back in Return of the Jedi during the massive Battle of Endor, the final battle against the second Death Star. Really hoping we don't see another Death Star in this. There was one sequence when you do see some sort of red laser beam shoot into a planet-ish, or shoot into the crust of a planet. So I'm hoping we don't get some gigantic super weapon again. I really hope they don't do that. But the big takeaways is that we get to finally see it looks like Rey's final battle with Kylo Ren, and I'm super excited to see that. The Last Jedi was, I could talk about The Last Jedi at length in a Star Wars-based podcast later on, hopefully leading up to The Rise of Skywalker, but as much as I really, 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 really love The Last Jedi, there wasn't a traditional lightsaber on lightsaber fight like there was in The Force Awakens, which I still hold that The Force Awakens probably has one of the coolest lightsaber fights I've seen ever, and it looks like this could really be it too. It's great to see J.J. Abrams back at it because he does have a lot of visual flair, and while I think so far a lot of the cinematography in Last Jedi may still be some of my favorite cinematography so far, I'm really, really, really interested to see what JJ and his main cinematographer, Dan Mendel, can do with this. They do great work. They've done great work in the first two Star Trek films in the Kelvin timeline. They did a great job with The Force Awakens, and I'm just, based on what I'm seeing right now, it looks like this could be much more... It looks like this is a much better shot than The Force Awakens, which, not to say Force Awakens wasn't a great looking film, just some of the cinematography wasn't nearly as inspired, but this certainly looks as though it could be. The big last shot to really talk about is the shot with Rey with a double-bladed red lightsaber. Don't know what this is all about. I'm really hoping it's not a clone. I'm honestly hoping that it's just Rey. I'm hoping that it's actually Rey. It could be that Rey has gone to... It could be that Rey's been seduced to the dark side of the Force, which I think is incredible. In all honesty, this is the kind of stuff that's been foreshadowed since The Last Jedi, so I'm really, really interested to see what this could all mean. Again, we haven't gotten an official new trailer yet that'll give us more story details, which is a good thing. When The Force Awakens came out and when The Last Jedi came out, all of the trailers that we had seen up to that point kind of showed us a little bit of how the story would look like, but not exactly the context for the story, which is good. It led to a lot of surprises. One, that Force Awakens was a little bit more familiar of a story than we thought it was going to be. And then also that Last Jedi surprised us in more ways than one, and also to some members of the fan base, not in the ways that they were wanting it to be. But I'm excited. I've been very tentative about The Rise of Skywalker, but the more and more I see of the footage, the more and more I see of the visual tone of it, the visual look of it, I get more and more excited for it. So leading up to The Rise of Skywalker, we'll probably talk about Star Wars a little bit more. I can get my own in-depth opinions of what the Star Wars films are like. I'll try to figure out a way to lay out that podcast episode, but we'll come back to that at some point. So now that preamble's out of the way, now that we got that little small topic, we can finally jump into the anime for today's podcast. And the anime for today's podcast is Bungo Stray Dogs. So Bungo Stray Dogs is a shonen seinen action series that is produced by Studio Bones. Once again, the same studio that did My Hero Academia, Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, Fullmetal Alchemist the original series, Mob Psycho 100, and currently the new season of Bungo Stray Dogs as well, that just finished airing a couple weeks ago in Japan. The series itself is based off of a seinen manga written by Kafka Asagiri. Now, for those of you who are unaware of this, a seinen manga is basically a shonen manga. It has the same kind of themes of a shonen manga. A shonen manga is a manga meant specifically for boys, usually ages like 8 to about 13 or so, or 14, for younger boys in their younger teenage years. A seinen series is more of a young adult kind of show, is a more young adult kind of series. Seinen series are more geared towards headier adult themes that you can't put in a shonen manga. Usually they could be more violent. Usually they could be just more serious. They could be more mature. As we've seen plenty of times before, a lot of shonen series can have a lot of violence that you may not be used to in American society, American culture for a cartoon, but Japan really doesn't mind that so much. Seinen can either take that one step further, or just has a much more mature plot point, much more mature storyline that can sometimes maybe go over the heads of younger children. So Bungo Stray Dogs was developed by Studio Bones, and we're going to go ahead and jump right into the concept. and the story of it. So the story focuses on a young orphan, Atsushi Nakajima. After, excuse me, hiccup. After he had been kicked out of his orphanage, Atsushi finds this man called Osamu Dazai, trying to drown himself in the river. He finds out that this Dazai guy is part of an investigative industry in the middle of Japan, known as the Armed Detective Agency. And from this point on, Atsushi then finds out that all of Japan, all of the city that he's in right now, is filled with these individuals who are called the Gifted. The Gifted have these supernatural abilities that allow them to basically do different kinds of actions, different kind of magical type abilities. And we find out that Atsushi's gifted ability is his ability to turn into a berserk were-tiger in the middle of the moonlight. We find out that it was because of this reason that he got kicked out of the orphanage to begin with. Osamu Dazai then decides to recruit him to into the Armed Detective Agency, where he meets a bunch of other gifted users, and what follows is pretty much kind of an episodic kind of series. We don't get a good taste of what the overall plot of Bungo Stray Dogs in this one season alone. The entire series takes place in the city of Yokohama, somewhere in Japan. And the basic conflict for most of these episodes is that we get to see Atsushi become the target of another agency full of gifted individuals known as the Port Mafia, a criminal underworld group. And he develops a rivalry with one of the main officers of that Port Mafia group, Ryunosuke Akutagawa, who continuously hounds after Atsushi for his ability, and more fights and conflict ensue from there. We also learn more and more about a lot of the characters. For example, Osamu Dazai, who's probably the most popular character in the series, was originally an officer in the Port Mafia and is also Akutagawa's former lieutenant back during that time. Throughout this entire series, we get to see a lot of episodic episodes. They're very episodic villain of the week kind of episodes, where we mainly get the main gist of the first bit of this season is to introduce us to every one of the Port Mafia members, or the Armed Detective Agency members. We get to meet Rampo Edogawa. We get to meet Kyoka Izumi. We get to meet Dopa Kunakita, Akihiko Yasano, Kenji Miyazawa, and a whole bunch of other characters as well. And we get to learn more and more about their abilities. And this is where the only issue I have with Bungo Stray Dogs happens. It's incredibly unfocused as to what the general plotting is. The general plot of the story is very, very simplistic at first. It gets a little bit more complex in the last couple or so episodes. And then that also leads into exactly what the next season is going to be about as well. Where the second season of Bungo Stray Dogs, for those of you unaware of this, Bungo was first released in 2016 and was split up into two different seasons. The first season aired in the middle of spring 2016 for only 12 episodes. And then the next season, season 2, aired in 2016 during the fall for another 12 episodes. Actually, I think it might have been 13 episodes. And it does show that the first season is a very incomplete series, and that's the only issue that I have with the series myself, at least for this season 1. What I don't have issues with, however, are the characters, and I think that's where Bungo's first season does excel as well. Every single character is really, really well written and has nice little quirks that take them above normal shonen action tropes and do make them incredibly enjoyable. For example, Atsushi Nakajima does... Oh, excuse me. Well, sorry, I had a little bit of a coughing fit there that I didn't want to cough into the microphone. So back to what I was talking about. Atsushi Nakajima is a pretty interesting main character. He does feel like he's a bit of an outcast. He has his own insecurities based on his experiences that he's had in the orphanage where he was at, and where he was constantly outcast for reasons that were completely beyond his control. So he is definitely a very sympathetic main character. The main star of the show, though, the most enjoyable character himself, is Dazai, is Osamu Dazai. Dazai is a very, very interesting main character. Just based on that first introduction alone, where he finds so much glee in thinking that he's trying to kill himself by drowning in a river. He's a very, 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 very interesting character. It's hard to pin down exactly what his character's about, especially in this first season. But we do learn more and more about his character as the season goes on, and then we find out his connection to the Port Mafia, which also leads into one of the more interesting character interactions with him and his former partner, Chuya. I forgot his name. Chuya Nakahara, who is another ability user, part of the Port Mafia, and Osamu Dazai's previous partner when they were both in the Mafia together. We also get to see more and more of their abilities, and every single one of these characters has such an interesting ability. Obviously, Atsushi can turn into a were-tiger, but there's multiple other members of the armed agency and also the Port Mafia, and every single one of their abilities are certainly more unique than the last, and does create a pretty interesting power system as well. For example, in the armed detective agency, there's Rainbow Edogawa, who his stand ability, his ability, who apparently his main ability his ability is the ability to do something almost instantly and find out what the truth is of a crime scene, which makes him excellent for figuring out murders, for investigations, makes him literally the perfect member of the armed detective agency. There's also Doppo Kunikita, who has the ability to take anything from a piece of paper that he makes and turn into any object that he so wants. Akihiko Yasana has the ability to heal someone and also to heal herself. Kenji Miyazawa has massive super strength for no reason whatsoever. And then within the Port Mafia, Akutagawa himself has another. Akutagawa's ability is Akutagawa's gifted ability is the ability to manipulate shadows, manipulate his cloak to create basically daggers, to create daggers made out of shadows. So that creates some really interesting fights between Atsushi and Akutagawa. And then Chuya Nakahara has the ability to manipulate gravity, and that we don't see much of Chuya in this season, but we get to see him more and more throughout the series as we go on. But the one who's got the most interesting ability is Dazai himself, and his ability is the gifted ability to negate others' gifted powers just by touching them, which makes Dazai probably the most interesting wild card out of all the gifted users, and pretty much makes him an ace in a hole in almost every single one of these fights. So all these characters are really, really well fleshed out and have their great little quirks, as well as their own unique abilities. So that's all I'll say about the story for now. There's not much to say about the story and characters until we lead into Season 2, which I will talk about in a future episode. But let's go ahead and jump right into the animation. So the animation itself is by Studio Bones, so you know it's going to be good. Every single one of these designs have great, great character outlines that are based on really fluid character sheets that make them perfect for extremely fluid, flowing animation. And Studio Bones does a great job at animating these fight sequences once again. I really can't even say more about this animation. It just looks gorgeous. Background characters do look a little bit weird. Particularly, I noticed this when I was rewatching Season 1. There would be a couple times when you can see a background character and they have just a head, no face, no eyes, no nose, no anything, maybe a little bit of a nose, and they may be speaking and you don't see any lips flapping whatsoever because there's no lips drawn on them. So there are some shortcuts taken there with the animation, but it's not horrible. It's not too terribly distracting whatsoever. The music itself, I actually didn't even look up who the I didn't look up who the composer was, but I can look up really quick before I talk about that. But one of the other some of the best things about the music so far is definitely the openings. The openings are both the openings are done by two really, really great J-pop bands. There's Grand Rodeo for the opening theme, and then Luck Life for the ending theme. And they've all done different stuff as well. Grand Rodeo is well known for their opening themes and ending theme for the Seven Deadly Sins series, Nanatsu no Taizai, and Luck Life is also well known for the ending theme of Mob Psycho Season 1. So both ending themes and the OP, both of the endings and the openings fit really, really well. And as far as some of the sound design goes, sound effects are really strong as well. I've actually listened to the series, and I've watched the series in both the English dub and the Japanese dub, and they both have their perks, and they both have issues I find with it. The majority of the English cast is fantastic. Atsusushi is voiced by, I think, Matt Middleman, I believe. Max Middleman, who's well known for doing Ryu. Gosh, it's been a while since I played Persona 5. One of the main characters in Persona 5. He's also in Mob Psycho 100. Patrick Sates is in here. Vic Mignogna is also the voice of Ranpo Edogawa and does do a really good job. Don't get too attached to his voice because, obviously, for reasons that we don't need to talk about in this podcast, because that's not my area that I wish to go into. He's not in Season 3 as of now, but most of the voice cast is really good, except for Dazai himself. I'm not a big fan of Kaiji Tan's tenor when he plays his very, very bassy voice that he plays Osamu Dazai with. In the Japanese version, Mamoru Miyano is the voice of Dazai, and Mamoru Miyano has a very, very softer voice, which fits for Dazai. And for some reason, Kaiji Tan, whenever Dazai gets serious, decides to lower that voice so much, and it doesn't work. It really takes away from it. Mamoru Miyano, whenever he drops his voice down a little bit, he still keeps his tone. But whenever Kaiji Tan does it, it sounds like he's a completely different character, and I'm not a big fan of it. The music itself is really good. It's done by Taku Iwazaki, who had originally done the first season of JoJo's Bizarre Adventures soundtrack, but he also does a lot of stuff like Black Butler, some of the Rurouni Kenshin OVAs, and also the Soul Eater soundtrack and Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann. And it's good. It has a lot of different techno beats to it as well. It's not the most memorable soundtrack, but it does the job it does what it's supposed to do. So with that, I think we can go ahead and finish up talking about Bungo Stray Dogs. Again, this series, I do recommend the series a lot, but you have to kind of slog through this first season because there's not a focused story for the first bit of it. Its main focus is getting you introduced to a lot of these characters, and then you can get into the big main plot in Season 2, which I would love to talk about, because Season 2 is where this series really picks it up. Season 1, the first season of Bungo Stray Dogs is a good season, and I liked it. I'm really glad that I watched Season 1 at first, and then right after Season 1 got done, Season 2 was ready and available for me back in 2016 to watch. So I do recommend Bungo Stray Dogs, but definitely check out this season first, and then see if you like it, and then finish the entire series, and then the entire season, and then come back later, either in the next podcast, in a later podcast when I can talk about Season 2, or just go ahead and watch Season 2. But big recommendation, a very decent recommendation for Bungo Stray Dogs. So with that, we're going to go ahead and jump right into the video game for today's podcast. So just recently, I've been playing a new video game that came out this year, and that is the newest addition to the Devil May Cry series, Devil May Cry 5, published and developed by Capcom, and was released in March of 2019, this year. So the Devil May Cry series is one of my favorite hack and slash series of all time. I remember back when I first ever played the series back on my PS2, back in my teenage years in high school. My first exposure to the Devil May Cry series was the special edition for Devil May Cry 3, and then after that, I decided to play the original game. And then at the right time, Devil May Cry 4 came out for the generation of consoles at that time. And since then, I have been a big fan of the series. I like replaying Devil May Cry 3. It's one of the hardest games I've ever played, but it's one that I pride myself in actually getting pretty dang solid at. And I do like the original game a lot. It does show its age. It shows its age due to its kind of clunky hacking and slashing combo system, and also the fact that it was originally conceived to be a tank control Resident Evil game before becoming Devil May Cry. But unfortunately, the game series has been in a bit of the wilderness recently, and that's because of the reboot from 2013, DMC Devil May Cry, developed by Ninja Theory, the guys who made Heavenly Sword, Enslaved, and just recently Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice. DMC Devil May Cry wasn't a bad game, but it wasn't a good Devil May Cry game. It was missing a bit of the tone that we were expecting from a Devil May Cry series. The Devil May Cry series is well known for a great stylistic combo system, and just straight up over the top humor, over the top action that you can't help but think, wow, this looks so dumb, but it's still cool at the same time, and it puts a big old smile on your face. Well, our prayers were answered, and we finally got to see a new Devil May Cry game almost 11 or so years after the release of the last Devil May Cry series, the last Devil May Cry game in the main series. So if you're here for Devil May Cry for the plot, you're kind of missing the point. So the whole story of Devil May Cry is that long ago, there was a devil knight known as Sparta who decided to rebel against the demons of the underworld and side with the humans. He joins the human world. He falls in love with a human woman, and then he has two children, who are half demon, half human. Dante and his older twin brother Virgil. The main character of the Devil May Cry series is Dante, who becomes a devil hunter, who starts up his own shop known as Devil May Cry, where he takes on the odd jobs of fighting against demons and just trying to make the world a better place while cracking wise the entire time. As of Devil May Cry 4, another new character was introduced known as Nero, who may or may not be the son of Virgil. It was heavily implied in Devil May Cry 4. Might be more heavily implied in this game as well, but no spoilers there. Nero, who was a holy knight in this one church order before the church order was disbanded, who has now teamed up with Dante in order to fight against more demons. So now the main story of Devil May Cry 5 is that a brand new demon king known as Urizen is trying to wreak havoc on the human world, and Dante and Nero and a new main character known as V are trying to stop him. So and they all work together or work separately throughout these mission-based gameplay, all leading up to the end of the game where you get to fight a great boss fight, a great final boss fight, and you just get to hack and slash your way through hordes of demons along the way while just looking stylishly sexy while you're at it. So that's the main story. There's not much to it. It's not the most complex story. There are some really neat little story bits in like the last hour of the game, but that would go into some spoiler territory. But if you're a big Devil May Cry fan like I've been, it's nice to see these story elements in there, and it does add a little bit of emotional weight to the series if you are invested in the story in any serious capacity. Again, you don't have to be invested in this series in any serious way to enjoy the game, because the gameplay does it well on its own. So let's just go ahead and talk about the gameplay. So the gameplay allows you to play as Nero, Dante, and the new character V. And the entire gameplay, like I said, is a hack and slash bonanza. It's very combo based. You have the ability to use a ranged weapon, you have the ability to use a melee weapon, and you have a special ability just based on that single character depending on who you're playing. And that's just 3 buttons that you can use in different ways and different varieties in order to score some really awesome combos and raise your stylish meter and get better and better at the game and get a better rank at every single end of the mission. So I'll go ahead and jump into what I like about the gameplay. So you do have 3 different characters you can play as. So your main character, so the first player you get to play as is Nero. Nero has a simple pistol that he uses as his ranged weapon. That's sequestered to your circle button, or your square button if you're playing the PlayStation 4 version. The triangle button is your main sword attack, which you can use in different succession depending on how rhythmically you press the triangle button and how many skills and combos that you can buy throughout the game with the currency in the game, the red orbs. And then you also have your Devil Bringer ability, your Devil Breaker. Your Devil Breaker is, for Nero's case, is his right arm, which is a mechanical arm that replaces the arm that he originally had earlier in Devil May Cry 4 after he loses it because of story reasons in this game. And the Devil Breaker can be equipped with multiple different arms that all do different things. For example, you can have a Devil Breaker that creates an electrical shockwave. You can have a Devil Breaker that allows you to yeet your way out of a combo situation. You have one that allows you to shoot basically a rocket punch at someone. So that's depending on how good you get with recognizing combo patterns, you can pull off some great slick combos with Nero. In terms of some of the basic combat that you can do, you can obviously lock onto an enemy. Sometimes it's better to lock onto someone than it is to not, and sometimes it's better to not lock onto somebody than it is to actually lock on them. It just depends on what combo you're trying to go for at what time, and how stylish that you're trying to be. Jumping into some of the other characters, V's combat is a lot more different. V has the ability to use 3 different familiars. He has the ability to use a crow-like creature known as Griffin. He has the ability to use a dog-like, a tiger-like shadow, known as Shadow, who's basically his melee attack. And then he has a special guy and then he has a super special familiar who's hulking big, known as Nightmare, who just basically wreaks havoc every single time you summon him. So V's range attack is the Griffin, who allows him to shoot lightning bolts at people, and then Shadow is used for your basic melee attacks. And you can actually hit someone with V. What you have to do is you have to whittle down their health with both Shadow and Griffin, and do the best you can with combos as you can. And then once you've depleted their health enough, you can then use one of V's combo. You can use V's circle button to get in close to an enemy and then use the finishing blow. Now, I have to say, out of the 3 characters, V's probably my least favorite to play as. One, because honestly, he's kind of easy to play as if you just mash the square and triangle button in succession. The game grades you based on how stylish that you are. Excuse me, hiccup. The game grades you based on how stylish you are with your combos, and how great you can go from one string of combos straight into the other string of combos, and how you can bounce off other enemies with your combos. And for some reason, even on the Devil Hunter difficulty, every single mission with V I played with him as, I was S-ranking every single mission just by mashing square and triangle in succession and then occasionally circle to hit someone. So I wasn't a big fan of playing as V. Now, who I was a big fan of playing as is Dante. So Dante's gameplay is very similar to how he's like in Devil May Cry 3. Dante has not only his main sword weapon and his 2 handguns, the ebony and ivory handguns, he's also got a bunch of different weapons that he can get as well. He can use a broken motorcycle, basically as 2 different hammers in both hands. He can use a pair of gauntlets to kind of do some fisticuffs. He has a rocket launcher for a ranged weapon. He has a grenade launcher. He can use a whole bunch of different ranged weapons and melee weapons, and that is all intertwined into his style system. So Dante has 4 different styles. He has the Trickster style, which you use to either evade enemy attacks or get in close to someone. He has the Swordmaster style, which is much better for using sword combos with. he has the gunslinger style, which is better for gunplay, for using the circle button, for using the square button to deal some damage with your guns. And then he has the royal guard style, which allows you to guard against someone and then release that energy that you stored from that attack on them, basically allows you to store up the energy that you take in, that you were able to block, and then you can release it back on your enemy if you hit them in the right way. And as of Devil May Cry 4, and with this game, you can seamlessly switch between every single one of his ability, every single one of his styles, with just the push of the control pad, either up for trickster, right for sword, left for gun, right down for guard, and you can switch it mid-combo, you can switch your weapons mid-combo. Dante is a blast to play as if you actually get really good at him. He is a lot more difficult to play as than Nero. He's a lot more difficult to play as V, but he's definitely one of the more he's definitely the most satisfying character to play as. And the first time you play it, the first time you get to play as Dante, you're going to be thrown away by how much variety that he has. But playing as Dante might still be some of the most fun you'll have in this entire game. So there's definitely no knocking that. It's a little, even though he's a super complex character to play as, especially at that point in the game, it definitely makes it all the more rewarding when you finally figure out how he works. So that's all for the gameplay. Like I said, you get to play as all three of these characters. The entire game is mission based, where you get to travel around in the mission a little bit to find extra little nooks and crannies. Maybe there's some more red orbs. Maybe there's a blue orb, which if you collect enough of, you can raise your health up. There's some secret missions. There are some secret missions as well that you can find also. And usually, like every single Devil May Cry game, at the end of every single one of these missions is a boss fight. Either it's a really big guy that's super tough to beat, or it's an even smaller guy that you can do good old one-on-one swordplay with or gunfighting with. So it's all fun and games, and this is definitely a return to form for the kind of gameplay that we were expecting in a Devil May Cry game. Jumping into the actual engine of the game itself and how the game looks. So the game actually runs on the same graphical engine that Resident Evil 7 did and the Resident Evil 2 remake did. It doesn't look nearly as good as those two games, but the game still looks absolutely fantastic as well. So many of the environments, although they're not nearly as varied as some of the other environments in the Resident Evil 2 remake and Resident Evil 7, do look extremely good, and the art design looks fantastic. All the character models look great as well. It's very clear that they are based on... It's very clear that they could easily be based on motion... based on motion acting. It looks like there could be a basis for a lot of the characters' faces and motion capture, so that's also a really neat touch as well. And then we can go ahead and jump into the sound design as well, and the actual soundtrack. Ruben Langdon returns as Ruben Langdon. Wow. Returns as the voice of Dante after his initial foray into the role in Devil May Cry 3, and he does a great job as always. Johnny Young Bosch, who was Nero in Devil May Cry, does return and does a great job at pretty much providing kind of a younger, basically a younger mini Dante kind of style to the voice as well, but he still does a great job with it. I forgot who plays V, but I completely forgot who plays V, but he kind of sounds like a younger Crispin Freeman. I suppose maybe I should look into who actually plays V. But all the voices do a great job. And then there's the music. So the music for Devil May Cry 5 is awesome, and the basis for that comes from the three battle tracks that play whenever you're actually in a fight. So whenever you're actually in a battle, and you can change this in the jukebox as well. You can change it so every single character either has the same character theme, or you can change it so they have different character themes. But all three of the main characters all have a different theme that they fight against, that they fight to. And what's cool about the music is that there's a dynamic range to it, depending on how good you are at the stylish combat. So if you start off, every single fight you have, you start off with 0 style. And then as you get better, you can raise your rank up from D to C to B to A to S, to double S to triple S, just depending on how great you're able to string together combos. And what's great about the music is that the music changes based on how stylish you're being. So that's such a nice little touch, especially considering how good most of the fight themes are. Dante's main fight theme is, I forgot the name of it. Let me search it up really quick. Dante's main fight theme is Subhuman, which is kind of that same grungy rock that we're used to in the other Devil May Cry series. In the rest of the Devil May Cry series. V's battle theme is a little interesting as well. Again, it's similar. The name of it is Crimson Cloud, and again, it's kind of similar to some of the other Devil May Cry themes as well. Definitely the standout, though, is Nero's battle theme, Devil Trigger. So if you've seen the original E3 trailer back in 2018, this was the theme that was used to reintroduce Devil May Cry 5 back to it. And it is freaking fantastic. The vocals are by Casey Edwards and Ali Edwards, and Ali Edwards' voice is just one. I would love to see this girl in more punk rock, in a more punk rock setting, because her voice is absolutely fantastic. And when you pair it up with the stylish combat, it's a great escalation to how if the music just escalates to its core so perfectly whenever you get some nice stylish combos going on. So the music's fantastic. I think that's all I'll have to say about Devil May Cry 5. The game itself is not very long. I started the game on Thursday, I believe, this week, and it took me about maybe 3 or so days to finish it. The game itself is probably about 9 to 10 hours long, so it's not very long. Luckily, there's a lot of different gameplay options that you can have. You can play, once you beat the game on the Devil Hunter setting, which is the hardest available setting, you can then go back in and play it on the higher difficulty setting. Then you can keep on replaying the game, get better at it, play through the harder difficulties, and then you can also just all the way up till the highest difficulty setting, which is usually the Dante Must Die difficulty, which we've seen in pretty much every single Devil May Cry game since then. So the game definitely can, I can see this game having a massive lasting appeal to me. The great thing about this game is that it doesn't replace a lot of the other Devil May Cry games. If anything, this game does act like it's a much more improved version of Devil May Cry 4. A lot of the issues that I have with Devil May Cry 4, such as the fact that there was a lot of backtracking with Dante in the second half of the game, is completely fixed in this game because it's a much more balanced game between all the three characters, and it's just all around so much more fun to play than Devil May Cry 4. So I can easily see this game probably maybe getting as much acclaim as Devil May Cry 3 as we go throughout the time. So it'd be nice to see exactly where this game kind of lands by the end of the year, because I could easily see this being one of the better games of 2019. Maybe not as good as Resident Evil 2, maybe not as good as Fire Emblem Three Houses, but definitely one of the better ones. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and close out today's podcast. I want to thank you so much for listening in. Again, there were 2 recommendations for today: the anime Bungo Stray Dogs and the video game Devil May Cry 5. I want to thank you so much for listening in to today's podcast. I'm going to go ahead and close out. My allergies are getting kind of bad. As you can kind of tell, my voice is getting a little stuffy. So I'm going to go ahead and finish off today's podcast. I want to thank you so much for listening in. If you want to see more of this podcast, please make sure to like, comment, subscribe. Any of your views help get this podcast to more viewers. And then hopefully we can see this channel grow a little bit further once I get a little bit more solid foundations in my own personal life and my own work life. And I would like to see this channel grow even further. But for now, I like doing this podcast. I like talking about what I like. And I hope you guys like hearing about what I like to talk about. So thank you so much for listening in. This has been the Fifth Child Podcast, and I will see you guys in the next episode.